So I will say, before we get into it,
Yeah.
I know you haven't worked for me for a very long time.
It's been over a decade.
But if the first time I'm not able to come down and do this and I leave you unsupervised, you watch Rebel Moon, I'm just going to ask you directly, do you need me to supervise you?
I listened to Netflix recommendations and should not have done that. So now, but here's the thing: is
do you need a supervisor?
Well, here's what it led to, though. Here's what it led to. I don't need a supervisor. I'm fine. Look, I didn't make no decision. Everything I learned working for you was there's three kinds of decisions. There's good decisions, bad decisions, and no decision. And the worst one isn't either of the first two.
Yeah, got it.
So I made a decision. It wasn't a great decision, but it was a decision. But it led
mad.
to.
I'm just disappointed.
It was a learning experience. We're going to learn from this and grow. That's the plan. I did, however, start doing the same thing, though, if you haven't watched it yet, because I know you've been watching TV because you've just been hanging out in bed, but the new True Detective, The Night Country, the first episode.
Oh, I didn't know it was actually out. I keep hearing ads.
Came out on Sunday.
Okay.
Watch it.
Oh, okay.
Watch it and like, I'm so excited for it. I'm going to do like an episode by episode, like review. Starting this week actually, and because I did the one for Rebel Moon, I'm gonna do like a solo thing where I review those episodes, and maybe we can talk about them like in these preambles back and forth when you start watching it. I'm so excited about it. It's maybe it's just because we just did the thing. Maybe it's because it's winter. We just watched 30 Days a Night again. It has all that stuff like
it's funny. Zoe and I just watched 30 Days of Night right before Halloween.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, it's got all that stuff just dripping out of it. It's so good. And it's got Jodie Foster channeling her Wilford Brimley. It's so good. She's so miserable and grumpy and like, I
love the idea that Jodie Foster could be the new Wilford Brimley.
Right?
That's how I want to see
she's incredible. She's so good all through. Like all the actors so far are incredible. And you're going to recognize a bunch of them. And then there's a bunch of like people are getting like a really good shot from this, I think, too. So hi, everybody. The loose horse shit portion is we're deep into it now.
All right, well, we're all out of time, so no World War Z today.
Jay's back, obviously, and we're covering World War Z. This was your pick for literary media.
And let's be crystal clear. This was definitely my pick for literary media and not for any other kind of media. Everyone should read World War Z
or listen
to the audiobook. Yeah. And not absorb anything pretending to be World War Z in any other way.
So we're covering 2006 World War Z, an oral history of the zombie war, and this was your pick. It is a very interestingly written book by Max Brooks. Yes, that Max Brooks, son of Mel Brooks.
He's your children's favorite author, right? Because, I mean, most of the last 5 or 10 years, he's been writing Minecraft books.
He has been writing Minecraft books, so I think it's great. He's had such an interesting career. He's also been a political commentary writer, or writer and like guest, which is actually...
he was a political commentary writer when he was writing this. This book. Nobody realized it at the time.
But I think this was, and it's funny because I'll probably come to this in the end. To me, this always felt like his audition to be on The Daily Show.
Yeah.
Because this book was written during a mid-Gulf, like Gulf War II, Afghanistan War, Bush, post 9/11 world. And it's very much a commentary on the political climate all across the world during that time.
There's going to be a tendency for people to interpret it because he's an American and a lot of the story happens in America to interpret it as being about America. It really isn't. It's really a commentary on the cynicism and the disenfranchisement with government in general and bureaucracy specifically.
They keep referring it to as brushfire wars all through the book.
Yep.
They talk about everyone's weariness with the divisiveness and politicization of brushfire wars all across the world.
Which at the time was also a theme in a lot of military biographies that were being published.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 2006, the aughts, basically, this was like a recurrent theme.
It was, in fact, the style at the time.
It was the style at the time. And so what he wrote in this book is I said Stephen A. Ambrose. You said...
It is Studs Terkel.
It's Studs Terkel,
It's
a classic style of...
Studs Terkel wrote a book in 1984 called The Good War, which was an oral history of World War II.
Yeah.
This is that exact format copied over into the zombie apocalypse.
I read it as Band of Brothers. It was coded Band of Brothers to me in the same way that it's you interview everyone who was there, and then you take what you think is the most compelling or poignant POV of an event, and then you stitch them together chronologically to tell the story of that time in a way that's compelling and kind of honors the memory of those people and who was there and how it was done. This is just being done fictitiously for a zombie apocalypse war, where the entire world basically has to go to war with the rest of the with 3/4 of the world, right? Because it's the living dead. And then it basically thinly veils the political commentary of what that would mean for us and what the world might look like after that happens. But it's
very thinly.
It was, as you mentioned earlier, it was adapted into both a abridged and unabridged audiobook. And so I've read the book several times, but I couldn't find my copy. So what I did was I re-listened to the audiobook, realized there was an unabridged version with new actors, and listened to that. And man, what a cast. What a cast. The abridged one had I think the perfect cast of people that Max Brooks likes in general, like his friends.
I think the abridged one felt like it was perfectly cast. Even when you're listening to it and you recognize an actor's voice, because they weren't voice actors, they were all like actors and people he knew and stuff like that. But they all fit their characters perfectly. Yeah. And that's not just me fanboying. Like, I just re-listened to it, and it's amazing how convincing. Like, when you hear Alan Alda, it's Alan Alda. Like, you can't not
hear Alan Alda.
Understand that it's Alan Alda, but he is perfect.
He crushes the person he's playing. This like mildly cynical, like he plays Hawkeye. Yeah. The whole thing with Hawkeye is a guy who Hawkeye Pierce from MASH, for those of you that don't know his personality in MASH. But he's playing a person who has seen too much and knows too much and has like a gallows humor about the entire process, except he's like an economist this time.
And it's interesting because you were talking about how, we're going to keep talking about how it's political commentary and how this book felt like Max Brooks's audition to be a political commentator. Alan Alda's portrayal in the audiobook feels like his audition for The West Wing.
Yeah,
it completely feels like his audition to play Arnold Vinnick.
Yeah, for this this is such an aughts book and piece of like audiobook and media. The original audiobook's 2007, which is the one we're talking about, but the 2013 one adds some what we might call stunt casting. Because these are characters
I will call stunt casting. There's no might.
It's a bit of stunt casting. So just to call it some names, Max Brooks does the narrator, aptly played by Brad Pitt. I can see Brad Pitt, Max Brooks. Totally the same. It's mirror image.
God, I hate you so much right now.
In the movie, Max Pitt. Max is Max. That movie is Max Pitt.
Brad Brooks is better because it sounds like a comic book supervillain.
It does a little bit, yeah.
I'm Brad Brooks.
It does, yeah. Brad Brooks gets the symbiote. Steve Park plays Kwang Jing Shu, who's a Chinese physician. Frank Kamai plays Nuri Televaldi, who's a smuggler and human trafficker. And then stunt casting, Nathan Fillion in the unabridged one plays Stanley McDonald, a Canadian soldier in the 3rd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. Paul Sorvino is also a cast in the unabridged one as Fernando Oliveira, a Brazilian surgeon, a plastic surgeon he's a black market heart transplant guy.
Yeah,
which is very interesting. I'm gonna go through the ones that aren't the 2013. Actually, Carl Reiner plays Jürgen Werbraum. He's a Mossad agent that basically like discovers or uncovers the zombie apocalypse before anybody else.
So good.
He's really good in it. Walid Zuttair is a Palestinian refugee who moved to Israel just before the Great Panic. J.O. Sanders is Bob Archer, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, is also great.
Yeah, he is bang on.
Mm-hmm. Dennis Boutsikaris as Travis D'Ambrosia, the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe and the creator of the R2K, which is the resource to kill ratio.
And even if that name doesn't sound familiar, if any of you have watched any TV show produced in New York, he's been in everything. Yeah. He's been in 800 episodes of Law and Order, playing 800 different characters.
Yes. Now, there's a lot of stunt casting here. AJ Naidu plays Ajay Shah. It's an Indian office manager that fled the undead to like a coast and saw these ships basically being dragged into the sea. Henry Rollins is T. Sean Collins.
He has got to be of the stunt casting. He has got to be.
He's not stunt cast. He's in the original.
I know he's in the original, but like, I mean, he's Henry Rollins just doing Henry Rollins.
Imagine Henry Rollins was a PMC. That's who he is in this.
And I I love him in that.
Yeah, I also love him. Maz Jobrani is Ahmed Farnakian, a Islamic Republic of Iran Air Force guy who accidentally helped spark a nuclear war. Amon Walker is Paul Redeker, controversial former apartheid.
Oh, that was your first spoiler.
That's right.
Because he doesn't present the audiobook as Paul Redeker at the start.
No. Amon Walker as David Allen Forbes, who is an English artist who was in the defense of Windsor Castle in England. Jürgen Prochnow, who I friggin' love being in this, as Philip Adler, a former tank commander in the German army.
Man, that guy can do anything. Tanks, U-boats,
that's true.
Spaceships and wing commander,
he's
whatever,
the guy from
man.
Das Boot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the general or the captain in Das Boot. Michelle Colas Brooks as Jessica Hendricks, an American-Canadian woman who survives up north in the Great Panic in Manitoba and has a interesting time of it. Alan Alda as Arthur Sinclair Jr., the chair of the Federal Reserve and former Secretary of Strategic Resources. Rob Reiner again is the wacko. He plays two characters, and that's what I think is great. The Vice President of the United States, who's basically, they have like a coalition government during the apocalypse with a Democratic president and a Republican VP.
Yes.
Which is very interesting. Dean Edwards is Joe Muhammad, a paraplegic former member of the neighborhood security team. Basically, he's a guy who is part of like a neighborhood watch for zombies, but he's in a wheelchair. And then Becky Ann Baker as Christina Yiolopoulos, an F-22 pilot who becomes like an air hauler and has a very interesting, maybe hallucination trip through a swamp. Frank Kamai as Tomonaga Ijiro, a Hibikashi who is like blinded in the atomic blasts at Nagasaki and survives like the apocalypse after the entire island of Japan or the archipelago of Japan is evacuated. This is my favorite one. John Turturro as Soryosa Garcia Alvarez, a Cuban civilian. He's my John Turturro during Cuban he's basically Jesus from The Big Lebowski. It's incredible.
You gotta respect the Jesus.
Yeah. Nobody fucks with the Jesus. John McElroy is Ernesto Ogwin, a Chilean naval attaché who watches the Honolulu conference, which is a big turning point in the story. Brian T. as Young Choi Choi, KCI deputy, who's in... this is a different one. There's two different characters there. And that's it. But now let's talk about the stunt casting. I'm not going to talk about their characters, but the stunt casting, we start with Nathan Fillion. There's also... This one, it gets deep. It's like the entire cast of TNG is in this. So it's Nathan Fillion, like I said, Paul Sorvino, Adekumbo McCormick. We've got, and then it starts to get really crazy. Martin Scorsese shows up as a billionaire.
Sure, you do.
Simon Pegg, Denise Crosby, Bruce Boxleitner, Nikki Klein, Jerry Ryan. Who else? I forgot to say Mark Hamill. Mark Hamill.
Mark Hamill's Todd Wainwright.
He's the most important one. He's Todd Wainwright. He's my favorite of the original ones. David Ogden Steers, Cal Penn. That's a very of its time casting.
Well, what's weird about him being in that second one is, wasn't he working at the White House at the time?
I think
he was like in some kind of communications position with the Obama White House.
He was, yeah. And then Frank Darabont shows up in this. Parminder Nagra, Mazioka, Rick Young, Alfred Molina, Common, F. Murray Abraham, and Renee motherfucking Aubergenois, Odo from Deep Space Nine.
I was going to say Mr. House himself.
Dude, I love Renee Aubergenois. I will stand for Renee Aubergenois in anything he's ever in. But those audiobooks are far and away, I think, one of my favorite things about this book, because it gives, reading this book is one thing. And I love that we haven't even gotten into Bon Voyage yet. We're still talking about it. But reading this book is one thing, but when you hear it voice acted as an interview, it's incredibly compelling. I actually think that the unabridged audiobook is a better way to consume this media than reading the book. It's
interesting because for me personally, like, as you know, I have a tendency, I sweep and clear a lot. I don't keep a lot of things.
I know a lot of your shit's here at the studio.
And World War Z is one of 2 audiobooks, that I've ever kept.
Yeah.
All the rest are in a landfill somewhere.
Yeah. So one of the things that popped into my head as soon as you said that you wanted to do this was, one, I have to read this again. Oh, thank God there's an audiobook. But two, how are we going to do this and not have this be 4 hours long?
Right.
So what we decided between us before we started this was we're going to have a format for long form media where we divide it up into the act structure during Bon Voyage, and we each pick our favorite POV of that act structure to kind of talk about the plot synopsis.
And I think
because how do you talk about an entire war in this, right? Like,
and I think because of the structure of this story, it lends itself really well to that.
Absolutely.
Because it's like we talked about, there's one narrative thread running through the whole thing, and then you have all these little vignettes, but they're not all inherently hugely important to the overarching plot. They're very important to making you feel what you're supposed to feel, but they're not inherently.
They add to the humanity, but not necessarily the narrative of the story or even the theme that the story is trying to bring to light. So I think that's it then. I think we need to find...
I think we're already at 4 hours.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, we need to find, what was it called? Our SIRS. We have to go load some 5.56 into our SIRS.
Yeah.
We have to get our Lobos, our entrenching tools.
Our Lobo sticks.
Our Lobo sticks. And I guess set forth on the Great Walk across the Great Plains to the East Coast to where we live now.
Is this the walk into the cursed earth? It feels like the walk into the cursed earth.
Well, we've secured the Rockies. We have to set forth and walk all the way in a giant line across the country. So it's time to bon voyage our way into clearing all of North America of the undead.
Pack your bags and chew off your fingers. It's time for Bon Voyage.
All right, so in Bon Voyage, this is the part of the breakdown where we give you a plot synopsis. And obviously, this is a big plot, but we're going to break into the act structure. And the first part of the act structure that I'm going to go through is called The Denial and the Great Panic. And in the book, what it is it's the sort of key scenes where you have people not really believing this is a thing, profiting off this is a thing, that zombies can come back to life.
Yep.
And then, of course, the eruption of this as being a plague across the entire earth. And what I figured we'd do is we would each pick our favorite vignette that kind of that kind of sets things in motion. Sure. But before we do that, I'm going to go through one that is probably the inciting incident for each act. In this case, the inciting incident for the first act of this, the Great Panic and the Great Denial, is people moon fishing in a village in China. And it is the reminiscences of, and I don't want to ruin this, I'm going to say his doctor name right here, a doctor named, Chinese physician named Quang Jingshu. And Quang Jingshu basically is treating a bunch of weirdly sort of like sick patients who are developing fevers and having to be restrained by their loved ones because they're becoming violent, attacking people. And when he asks what the nature of this was, why is this happening? The villagers in this like small sort of province in China, who are living at a much lower standard of living than the rest of China, almost like a feudal level, say they went moon fishing, which means that they in the dark illegally went into a dam, like a dammed lake that was created when their old village was flooded to create a power station. And there's relics and stuff left behind there that they're trying to get back. So they would go fishing. They would basically dive down, get whatever they could, and come back. And one kid comes back with a bitten off toe. Something bites off his toe down there, and no one knows what it is. And this is the inciting incident of the entire war. Is this small province has an outbreak. And it kind of infers that the Chinese government flooded this town maybe for a different reason, that a power station wasn't the actual reason. Like, you're never really told that explicitly, but the government knows exactly what to do. They ask him, he calls one of his friends who's like in the local sort of like, I guess, physicians board body with the military, this guy named Gu, and Gu says, "Are you armed?" And the physician goes, no, but that was weird. And then he says that one final thing that tells him to like get out of there and to get his family to safety and get out of China is they have this reminiscence that when they were back in the military together, there was this horrible moment where they were fighting and the foreign forces were about to like overrun them while they're trying to save this guy's life. He's like got shrapnel in his chest, doing like open heart surgery, basically trying to stabilize him. And his friend Gu is this like ultimate cynic who thinks that everything's going to be the worst it's possibly going to be.
Always has something horrible.
And he looks up while it's all happening and says to his friends, "Don't worry, everything's going to be okay." And in this phone call with him, he says to his friend, "Don't worry, everything's going to be okay." And that's the tip off that everything's not going to be okay and something's horribly wrong. And that kind of tells you that the military knows someone's gotten bitten, there's this horrible fever, they're becoming violent, that this has happened in China before and been suppressed or covered up by flooding this village.
Because up until that comment, his friend, everything he asks him is very pointed and very outside of the norm of what you like. It's very direct, it's very abrupt, but it's not what you would expect one doctor communicating to another.
It's not
doctor.
personal. And it has nothing to do with the humanity of the people that are being treated. It's just this country bumpkin doctor calling his friend to like report something weird that might be happening. And so from there, in The Great Denial, we have our what I'm going to say is the second sort of kickoff point, which is this starts to spread to other countries. There's an outbreak in Cape Town in South Africa. And that's where it starts to actually get publicized because the Chinese government is suppressing this manically. And so I'll pass over to you for during this period. Like I said, it escalates and escalates and escalates. But for the most part, and this is kind of that political commentary part of it, we are in denial that anything bad could be happening in real parts of the world.
Yes.
That these conflicts are removed from us and somewhere else, and this outbreak of disease is not really a big deal. So what was in that period in the book, what was your kind of like key standout moment?
So my favorite part was, and you've already kind of covered it, was the doctor, was the Chinese physician.
Yeah.
And the thing that made it my favorite part is it really established the tone of the book. And by the tone of the book, I don't mean the tone as a zombie apocalypse story. It really established as a zombie apocalypse story. This is a throwback to George Romero. Like this is
slow zombies. That's right. Yeah, it's worth noting they are Romero zombies.
Well, when I say throwback, what I actually mean is the fact that all of his original movies were really social commentary. They weren't really they weren't about the zombies any more than Invasion of the Body Snatchers was about the aliens, right? Mm-hmm. Like it was really about our reactions to these things and kind of the whole, we joke about it all the time, but the us being the monsters thing, right? And the slow build with the doctor, like the incredibly slow burn where he has to fight his way through these people's guardedness and cynicism because their whole thing is they're not supposed to be here. The reason that they're this small isolated community is they were supposed to have been moved out when their original village was flooded.
Right.
And they've established this new
to Chang?
I want to say illegal, but off the map, like he can't find it. No one in the area can tell him where it is. Like there's nothing unnatural about it, but it's like these people are squatters.
Yeah. They're displaced people that are not well liked by their government.
And he comes there for no reason other than to help them. And he has to fight through layers and layers and layers of their stories and their built up narrative to get to the point where he actually figures out what's going on. There's this huge long build where they're trying to get him to sort of triage every individual person. But when he's trying to identify the source, like it's a fight to get that information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it really establishes the tone early on that people don't trust other people. And that the fact that people don't trust other people is what's actually going to kill all these people. Mm-hmm. And it's what's going to make it worse. And then,
Yeah, the great denial part of it, right? Yeah. Where they're denying the existence of this happening.
But that is laid bare. Like it's one of those things like when you watch a movie and you get to kind of the twist or the big reveal at the end, and you go back and realize the entire thing was foreshadowed in the first 90 seconds of the movie. This is that moment.
And it's funny because he is one of the characters they come back to.
Yes.
And that's there are a couple characters in the story that their interviews take place and are interspersed more than once through the act structure of the story because their point of view is so important.
So the format is effectively that the narrator, after the fact, I think it's set 10 years after the original event, has gone back and conducted all these interviews with all these people that have survived through the event. But then those individual interviews, so it's like one interview with this doctor, but then it's cut into 3 chronological pieces interspersed with other people's stories.
Yeah, which is, I think, a good way of doing it because it shows I think to your point, it shows the gravitas of that person's POV and how important it was to the overall narrative. So my pick for this part of it, it was very tight. There's 3 in contention basically, and I'll breeze through 2 and then get to one that's my favorite. So the first one is the organ smuggler in Chile. He's a surgeon, basically black market surgeon in Chile. And one of the things is showing how our rampant commercialism spreads the virus is that a lot of illegal organ transplants are being purchased from China,
right?
From cadavers in China and smuggled to other parts of the world. And people skipping the line basically to get organ transplants would go to countries that had far more relaxed laws. And so very often these organ transplants would come from cadavers that had been killed because of the zombie outbreak. in China that was being suppressed, but no one really knew or didn't care, and they would just sell the bodies anyway. And all of a sudden, there was a flood in the black market of organs available, of stuff available.
Yeah,
and so these greedy surgeons, black market surgeons, would put them in people, and those people would then probably still healthy because it would take a long time for the virus to spread that way because it wasn't a bite necessarily. It would take a long time for it to kill them. They would fly back to wherever they're from and then spread the virus there. And it would that contributed basically to the spread of the virus initially without anyone knowing that it was happening. My second favorite, T-Shawn Williams, because it just shows how it's basically like a Rome is burning kind of thing.
I'm going to get to T-Shawn in my second point.
Yeah, it's great. I love T-Shawn Williams. He's basically this PMC living it up in like Cuba now. He's living in the Caribbean, which is the most secure place on Earth, which logically makes sense in a zombie apocalypse. Cuba especially because it was self-contained because of all the embargoes and they were forced to rely on their own resources. Because they're an island nation, they aren't being invaded by hordes and undead. As long as they can control the infection inside the island, they're fine. But he's basically reminiscing on his last days in America, and how being paid to protect rich celebrities and the fact that they couldn't help themselves from live streaming their location.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's be crystal clear: rich, douchey celebrities.
Yeah, and the fact that they're live streaming it to everybody, and then how they get overrun isn't actually the zombies; it's all the people trying to be safe. They realize where they are immediately.
They're basically doing Big Brother.
Yeah.
In this like armored, fortified compound that, you know, the richest of these rich dudes has built.
Yeah, he's a billionaire.
But they've decided to live stream it because they got to show people that they're rich and wealthy and everything is great where they live, even if you're fucked.
Yep.
And then people realize, hey, this place is full of food and shelter.
500 or 600 people come and like secure the place, basically, and take it over and turn it their own little fiefdom, which is very funny. But my favorite one of the Great Panic and the Great Denial is to do with a pharma mogul who is being interviewed now living in Greenland, basically in like an isolated research station all by themselves that they've bought and rented. And is in great denial that he did anything wrong by marketing an anti-rabies vaccine and saying it would keep you safe from the zombie apocalypse because someone called it African rabies because there was an outbreak in Cape Town. And they used that erroneous description of it to then market as basically a rabies vaccine.
Yeah,
it's just a normal rabies vaccine for people who might be at risk of contracting rabies, but they said that it would keep you safe from the zombies. And so he made billions of dollars as the society was collapsing.
Thank God. No one would ever consider doing that during some sort of pandemic. In the real world.
Who would ever consider? God. Who knows? Take your zinc. So it's just very fun.
My horse is sick.
That one was very, very poignant to me.
And again, written in 2006.
Still pretty poignant.
Yeah.
So like those really kind of like, I think, highlight the inciting incident here. So moving into Act 2, after the Great Panic, when it's revealed that these zombies are actually going to kill everybody, the inciting incident of the Great Panic, and this is kind of the big reveal of my favorite character in the audiobook, which is Mark Hamill, and the character who is I would say, most commonly returned to because of the militarization that has to happen later on, which is Todd Wainia. And he's a former infantryman, and he was in the American Armed Forces before the war, and he's retired because it's 10 years after victory is declared. So it's not just 10 years after the outbreak. It's the outbreak lasts like 15 years to clean up. And then there's 10 years after that when this is actually being written. He's retired. I think he's living in the mountains. He's living in Denver and Colorado when it's all said and done. But the first basically big battle of the war is at Yonkers in New York City. Or not in New York City, in New York. Suburb of New York, which is Yonkers. And they decide they're going to have a big showy victory that the American military can handle this no matter what happens.
It's a war for CNN.
It's a war for CNN. So they have reporters there. They highlight the whole sort of like battle. Everything is like super high tech. They have a thing called Land Warrior, which is like networked soldier capabilities where they can see everything happening. And they start to try and fight the zombies coming out of Manhattan. Yeah. And it's millions of zombies. Literally like 25 million zombies start marching out of the city as they attract them, because they use attractants to try and get them, which they do use later on. And they build like a big fortified position. And it's basically just an example of how using conventional military tactics against the undead is totally pointless and a complete waste of time.
So again, to go back to the parallels we do with the real world,
Yeah.
like one of the criticisms that your average soldier, like your soldier who actually fights in the field, has had for generations about their military, no matter which military it is,
Yep.
is your generals and your leadership are always preparing to fight the last war.
Yeah.
And they show up with all this stuff that's going to be great against tanks and aircraft
And conventional
other
militaries.
advanced
Yeah.
nations. And it goes the way it goes.
Yeah, every military is currently perfecting how to fight the last war is the line, and is also the sort of truism, the maxism that is being like espoused here. And so they're immediately overwhelmed. Like the zombies, they're firing like the tanks are equipped with like 1 or 2 flechette rounds. They're firing like anti-tank,
they're like filled with anti-armor rounds
or
to fight
high
zombies.
explosive rounds that just like shred the zombies, but they just get up and walk around because you have to guarantee that you've destroyed the brain. And so the zombies overwhelm them. And not only do they overwhelm them in HD, live broadcast to the entire nation through Land Warrior, through all the reporters that are there. And this is where the great panic basically becomes, oh my God, the nation's overwhelmed. We're completely fucked. So we move into part 2, which is Consolidation, and then the Great March West. And then in this act structure, 2 things happen. One, the parts of the world that get their sort of like their situation under control start to come together and communicate. The panic happens and all of society breaks down. What you see in the movies basically happens.
Yeah.
No one's talking to anybody. Everyone's just surviving by the skin of their teeth, and you can't get anywhere. You can't travel. Everything's done. But enough pockets sort of like consolidate themselves that they start a dialogue with other nations. They share ideas and resources. And this is done for 2 reasons, and this will be my preamble this time. One is a bunch of brave men and women in the ISS managed to keep telecommunications across the world alive by not coming home, and by the sheer the sheer sort of like bravery of one Chinese astronaut in the Chinese space station that's orbiting next to the ISS, not betraying, but disobeying orders, not scuttling the station, executing the other astronaut there, and communicating with the ISS that there is a ton of supplies here if you spacewalk over, and you can stay here almost indefinitely. And they're able to what was normally like a 3-month mission becomes like a 3-year mission.
Yeah.
As the ISS astronauts are bombarded by gamma rays, all eventually die from radiation poisoning and cancers and all the stuff that you would get by staying in space that long. But they're able to keep the telecommunications and basically the global communication network going. And also provides just intelligence of where the hordes of zombies are moving to, and logistical stuff that you would need to be able to coordinate a worldwide response to the zombies. The Americans clear the Rockies. They consolidate in the mountains because the winter becomes your best friend, basically.
Yeah, they freeze solid. So
as in any kind of elevation, the humans basically tend to do better. The survivors tend to do better. They consolidate those regions like the Himalayas, the mountains of like Peru. All these areas become basically consolidated, and they start communicating with each other. And the other flip side is the island nations. So Cuba becomes literally the most powerful country on earth, as they are like the trade hub, the port of call, the everything to everyone, and they provide food for all of these sort of like ailing nations where literally all the agriculture infrastructure disappears overnight. And at the middle point, sort of like the big important point of the sort of like consolidation phases, there's a conference in Honolulu where, because Hawaii becomes the new basically like governmental hub for the United States, because it's like Cuba. It's a sovereign part of the United States, but it is removed on an island,
isolated, low population density.
You can secure it. All that stuff can happen, and tons of ships who are escaping the continental United States basically raft up there and form these like floating cities to keep as many survivors alive as they can. And there's a Honolulu conference where I think 71 nations of the UN, like it's all that's left basically, that's like an operating nation, come together, and they decide, we are going to go on the offensive. The US president makes a speech, and he says, we are going to share resources, we'll share intel, we'll share whatever we have with each other. We're going to come together and share best practices for fighting these things, but also we are going on a global offensive, and the United Nations needs to back us because we need every single human being alive to try and cleanse.
So one of the things that a couple of the characters touch on is the notion of total war, right? And that this term has existed for a long, long time, but no nation has ever fought a total war. The closest historically that they talk about is the fact that the Japanese were preparing to fight a total war if there was a land invasion of Japan in World War II. But then, of course, no one's ever done that because you don't arm all the women, children, whatever in your society. But the idea is that every zombie is at war with you. There are no infirm zombies. Like they're all at war with you. So the only way you're going to win.
Yeah, there's never a time where they are not engaging in war against
exactly.
you.
So all of your population, all of everyone's population needs to be prepared to fight, either actively fight or defend themselves.
Or support that. Yeah. And they get it passed barely. Like 38 out of 71 nations attending agree. The other ones don't participate, but they also don't get the logistics and support. They basically just go off to their own little islands and kind of try to take care of themselves. But this kicks off the expansion across the world. And it requires, and this is where I'm going to pick my favorite. I'll go first this time. My favorite from this era of the description of what the warfare looks like is going to be Toddwania. And so Toddwania's description of the new military and how they perform what's the Great Walk Across America. They literally line up within sight of each other, and the U.S. military walks from the Rocky Mountains to the East Coast, covering every single house, square inch of land, because the only way to kill what they call Zach, because that's what they call the zombies, or G's, because they're ghouls, is to walk every inch of America from sea to shining sea and kill every single zombie.
It's basically
the only way to do it.
It's like a national version of the way like people conduct search parties for like missing children and stuff like that in the wilderness.
Like an airplane crash, basically like a search party across an airplane crash. And so they have to completely restructure not just the military. And there's a great bit by Alan Alda that I almost picked where they're restructuring the economy. But they have to restructure the military to be fighting this new war. That means that they're not really wearing camouflage anymore because they're not getting shot at. Yeah. They're wearing what's like a very interestingly made like SWAT one-piece jumpsuit, but it's woven with Kevlar mesh, so it's bite-proof. They have bite-proof gloves. They have these new carbines instead of having automatic weapons because they're only trying to shoot for the head. So they have like a thing they call the SIR. It's the I think the support infantry rifle. Yeah. Or standard infantry rifle. And it's just a 5.56 rifle with wood furniture because they can't make component or any kind of composite sort of like furniture for weapons anymore. So everything's being made from wood and steel. They're doing like the old World War II like steel conservation stuff, recycling stuff. People are handing all their steel and making stuff. And they have a thing called the Lobo, which is an entrenching tool with a big spike on it. Looks like a battle axe basically, to swing and knock people in the head. And when they start fighting Zach, they do it almost like they're fighting the Civil War or like a Napoleonic War. They play incredibly loud music near population centers where they know there's large swarms because they're seeing them from orbit with this like this satellite infrastructure that they have. They attract as many as they can out, but they prepare a massive firing line with ammo dumps and piles and piles of ammunition. It's the only thing they use the vehicles for more is to carry more ammunition. They attract them with, in this case, Iron Maiden, which I think is great. They play the Trooper. And it's to pump them up and to psych out the
why wouldn't you
get rid of the Zap basically. They pump Maiden out there and they stand in lines and they just fire until the zombies stop coming. They shoot and shoot and shoot. They take breaks. People will jump in the line and jump out of the line basically as they get tired and their headshot efficiency goes down, and they form massive walls of the living dead around them. As the living dead starts to encircle them, they move into a firing square. And they just let millions of zombies walk towards them while they take headshot after headshot and after headshot. And the line is, Zach's not in any hurry, why are you? They slowly squeeze off rounds, shooting for the head and shooting for the head and shooting for the head. And they fire a thing called the 5.56 Cherry Pie, which is an incendiary round that's designed to burn out the gray matter for the zombies if you hit them in the eye or the head. And he just describes how different this is from the battle at Yonkers. It's a completely different military. Every once in a while, they do have to go conventional military again, and they have special squads for doing that, where they will encounter the Wacko describes them as the Grand High Poobah of Duluth, where there's survivalists that have gone crazy and built their own little feudal kingdoms. But for the most part, they're just walking across America, killing every single zombie that they find until they get to the other coast. And that's how they consolidate the United States. That was my pick, was Toddwania's description of this new war, basically. What's yours?
It's funny because my pick is the absolute center of the intersection with Toddwania, because my pick was Arthur Sinclair.
Okay.
And Arthur Sinclair he's the Alan Alda character in the audiobook, but he's the guy that is not the military guy. He's not the CIA guy. He's not the head of American forces in Europe. He's not any of these.
He's the head of the Treasury Department.
He's a bureaucrat.
Yeah.
And his thing is he's the guy who's like, well, wait a minute, the army doesn't work. Like this isn't working the way we do this. And he's the one who, he doesn't come up with it, but he's the one who bigs up the Lobo stick.
Yeah.
Right. And so from his point of view, he's talking about how do you fight this war? So he's basically laying out not so much the infrastructure, but from a non-military point of view, the strategy and tactics that they're going to shift the conventional military into.
And he has to fight all of the entrenched people
Correct.
that believe they should be doing it the old way.
Because he's not a military guy and he clearly doesn't know what he's talking about. And he's literally just a guy looking at it thinking, well, hold on, if this doesn't work, he's very practical. He's one of the two most practical people, the other one being Paul Redeker.
Yeah.
He's the not evil practical person where it's just, well, no, this doesn't work. It doesn't matter that we spent all this money on it. We need to go to this, right?
And he has to have fights like how he describes it as bullets, bandages, and beans. Every army in existence wins because of bullets, bandages, and beans, not because they're brilliant leaders and tacticians and stuff like that. It's how can you get materiel to locations to equip the people that you have and the resources that you have.
And it's interesting because he's the character that you would like to identify the most with, probably. Like, he's a smart guy. He's got nothing but good intentions, unlike a lot of the other characters in the book. But he is the guy that if you were, again, back to the social commentary thing, if you were a member of the military industrial complex, he would be the villain of this story.
He'd be the enemy, yeah.
Right? He'd be the villain of this story. Like, the pilot even references the fact that she trained her whole life to get to fly an F-22, which is like the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. And now she's basically flying a dump truck.
Yeah. Yeah. She's flying a school bus, basically.
So Arthur Sinclair is the guy who basically says, no, let's just turn off all the taps to all these wasteful things, to all these things that are not working, that we think work because they've worked in the past. And he dials it back to, great, let's just get a stick and cave people's heads in and shoot people in the head and then move on.
Yeah, because the armies have to be bred, led, and fed, and he's basically put in charge of doing those three things. How do you get the people in the uniforms, retrain them? He also has to do the skills training stuff, which is very interesting, where like there's people who are F6, and it's anybody who had basically a high power job that was paying a lot of money today is now a janitor. Yeah. And then there's like a whole social fight through that, basically, where there's a woman who used to be I think she's like an interior designer or something like that, or like some kind of movie deal person, and she ends up working for and training under her old like cleaning lady.
And again, it's back to that total war concept where it's like, how useful are you in a society that is collapsing, in a society where you're being depopulated? How useful are you? And the truth of the matter is, if you're physically capable, you're useful. If you have a strong physical work ethic, you're useful. If you're a logistics person, ironically, if you're the kind of person he is, you're not necessarily as inherently useful to the war effort.
Yeah. This is definitely the strongest socialist messaging.
Yes.
It's coded very American and like practical because of this like force majeure that's come through. But there's a lot of socialist messaging of like, we are lopsided structurally in our economies to benefit a very small number of people. And look, we are 3 meals away from that not working anymore. Yeah. But from that just completely collapsing and that house of cards falling down. It's interesting. He finds all of his allies in the branches of the military that usually are funded last. So like for instance, the Marine Corps is a big advocate of his because they always have to get all of their resources from the Navy, and the Navy's not very interested in like land fighting. You know what I mean? So they're like, we don't really have any money for you. So the Marines come up with the Lobo because they're very used to like having to scrape by with whatever funding and like resources they can get. And also it's Alan Alda. So it's a
when you get into the audiobook and it's funny because historically I would say I had not been an Alan Alda fan. I really didn't like Alan Alda until this audiobook. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to give Alan Alda a little bit more
he's
time.
like a Lothario in MASH, you know what I mean, too? Like he's okay, like he's because it's all very Marx Brothers, you know what I mean? The way he used to do his comedy, you don't like him as much as you like this character.
I think the funny thing too is for me personally, I don't like social commentary delivered straight down the lens, right? Like if I wanted that, I'd be watching punditry on TV, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's just not my flavor. And MASH at times was very social commentary delivered right into the camera. And this is that same degree of social commentary, but it's just enough off center that
Yeah.
you're like,
There's
no,
enough
I'm enjoying
zombies.
this.
There's enough-
I'm enjoying this.
Yeah, you need enough zombies for Jay to be able to take the medicine, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So as we move into Act 3, the country's been secured, and we're into like a post-war world. And descriptions of what does that look like going into the future, and what was the human cost of all of this, really. The sort of like one that is, I think, probably framed the best for me is the idea that we now have new values because of this journey. And the person I think that I don't want to pick Todd Winnie again. He has a very poignant moment afterwards where he's playing baseball and talking about like the PTSD and the post-traumatic sort of like cost to him of having all this happen and how that's okay, of the people that were sort of like lost along the way. The one I'm going to pick actually in the audiobook is the one done by Common. And it's actually the story of the canine units that the military uses in this post-war world. And what you have is you have a canine dog handler describing basically his journey from being just nobody, never being interested in the military ever, to being a person discovered to have some type of bond with dogs, to being in this canine military unit where they would use them as search dogs to try and find zombies during this long walk across America. And then what that did to those dogs and those animals, and the emotional cost on those soldiers where he's the only one left. They've all killed themselves. Literally all of the soldiers in his unit have all basically, as they lost their dogs, not been able to handle a post-war world and find that companionship again. They've all offed themselves. And it's just him and maybe a half dozen of these remaining dogs, because 10 years later, there used to be dog shelters basically rehabilitating and like servicing these animals post-war all over the country, and his is the last one left. And I thought that was so sad and such a like, I guess, it wasn't cheap. You know what I mean? The way that like Jurassic Bark for Futurama is cheap, where you watch the dog at the end waiting for Fry to come back outside the pizza place forever. Like, I get what that's doing to me, and I get how that elicits emotion to me, and people love their animals and they love their pets because it's unconditional. Like, my personal view of why pets are so great and why I don't have pets anymore is that they're one of the few things in the world that will unconditionally love you back. Yeah. You know what I mean? That when a pet is attached to you, I feel this massive sense of responsibility to my pets because of that, because their affection is not transactional. It's unconditional. Yeah. And like, while you're being fed, you're feeding them and giving them shelter, and there's an element of that transaction to you. When you have a pet that actually cares about you, you can tell that that's like unconditional. To me, that wasn't being done from the point of view of the pets. It was being done from the point of view of the humans, showing what losing those animals that they had formed a bond with cost them basically over the course of the war. That was a real, like, I don't know, that really hit me in the gut, because I personally wouldn't have thought of that as an interviewer, as a thing to pull out and go, no, it wasn't just humans that lost people. And it wasn't just humans that got lost. Everything got lost. And this is where we are now in this world where there aren't that many dogs anymore. And there aren't that many people who know and love and even care for dogs. And people don't really have pets anymore for this reason. We're so like incapable of losing people anymore that we just don't have pets. And so there's wild dogs out there because only 1/10 of the Earth's population is left. And that's it. Like, we don't even fly. I think Todd Winnie mentions like, or maybe it's not Tommy, maybe it's Andrew Sinclair mentions that, I just realized Andrew Sinclair is the name of one of the characters.
Arthur Sinclair.
Arthur Sinclair. Shit.
It's not quite.
Arthur Sinclair.
You're close.
I was close, wasn't I? That mentions that there's no air travel.
Yeah.
That you travel on sailboat across the ocean now. Like that's the sort of like Middle Eastern countries burned their oil fields. So like there's no like post-war like really like a fuel economy, and because there was a nuclear war between Iran and Pakistan, there's no like sort of seasonal divide the way that we think of it as. They have a 3-year nuclear winter because of this short-term like nuclear exchange between Iran and Pakistan. So that one really caught me up because I wasn't expecting that angle of sort of like emotional attack of showing that cost to me. So what was yours?
I actually just sent you a picture of what you were talking about, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's
from last night.
That's from last night, you and your dog. When no one else in the house will pay attention to me, the dog will always pay attention to me.
The dog will still be there. So I'm glad you didn't pick Todd Wainio because I picked Todd Wainio.
Okay.
And the reason why is, and again, the book is great, but the audiobook is better at this.
Mm-hmm.
Is Todd Wainio in the middle part of the book? He's this cynical guy, but he talks in military jargon. Like he talks in military jargon to a degree that there's going to be moments where you feel like he's shoehorning it in.
Yeah,
where
it feels kind of funny almost.
Yeah. And T-Sean, who's an ex-military guy, who's a PMC guy, he is pretty stone cold and badass through the whole thing. And this is kind of the depiction of the characters who actually have faces, who are either military or ex-military in the middle of the book. When you get to the end, and for me, it's not just the baseball game, but when he's talking about, like, as they're kind of, when they were rounding up, when they were getting close to the end, and the soldier who just wanders off.
Yeah, just disappears.
And nobody knows why at first, and then they're like, this is his home. This is where he used to live, but he doesn't live here anymore, and nobody he knows is still here, and he's just like sitting in his living room. It's that idea of PTSD, because again, in most zombie stuff that we've watched, read, listened to, whatever, like there's this constant moving on. And part of that is just how we absorb media, right? Mm-hmm. Like you don't spend a lot of time on the after effects. Like usually the closest you get to spending time on the after effects is either an ironic twist at the end or like some kind of postscript that tells you how everything went. And the idea that you've got this guy who's lived through it, who's done things, who's seen things, and the things he's seen that are haunting him are not the burning bodies in Yonkers. It's not the people getting ripped apart. It's not any of this stuff. It's him watching other people. He almost talks like somebody who doesn't realize he has PTSD and sees the PTSD in everybody around
else,
him.
Yeah.
And that to me was super impactful because it's, I don't know what the term for it is, but you hear it described a lot in terms of people's emotional intelligence, that somebody can see what is wrong with, or that somebody else is struggling or somebody else is hurting, and they just don't see it in themselves. Mm-hmm. And he's got kind of this very sad tone, because you can tell that there's something that's broken inside of him, but he's super aware of everyone broken around him.
And he talks about it a little bit when he talks about the doctor that was on the fire line with them all the time, these special units that they had, and that every now and again he just wigs out. And he's like, but the doc says it's okay. It's like fault lines in Yellowstone letting off pressure so that the super volcano doesn't explode, and that's okay. But he said that these doctors were around, these special units were around, because the thing that made you a great soldier in this new military was your ability to survive long-term Z-shock. And Z-shock is described by the doctors as not being able to accept that the reality that you've lived in up until the point of the zombies doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. Right. And that some people, like you said, the guy who's confronted by his old house on his old street as they're walking across this like suburb outside Chicago, just wanders back into his house, sits down in his old chair and dies. Yeah. It's like flicking a switch. He just like switches off. Is it like that at some point you're running so hot mentally and physically that you just burn out, and that some people just do that.
And it's way more poignant than any, moment where a beloved character in a book or a TV show or a movie like this just gets killed. Mm-hmm. Like it's like watching somebody die that way. It's like all you can think is not that way.
They just burn out. They just burn out. Like they basically were running a fuse, and that fuse just ran out and they're gone. Yep. Whatever made them is gone. And that's it. So we end the book basically in a post-war world. I think the last entry is actually our first character, the doctor again. And he can think of his friend, he talks about the fact that he's an atheist, but he can think of his friend, if there is such a thing as an afterlife, shining down him and saying, don't worry, everything's going to be okay, because they've somehow come through this as a species. Humanity's basically been at the very edge of extinction and come through it as a species because they managed to make all these compromises to all of the things that we were failing on to pull ourselves back from the edge. Is that it? We've come through our story. The zombie war is over. We find ourselves the ruins of, I guess, Manhattan, outside of the MoMA in Manhattan. And we have to decide, are we going to go inside? Because the zombies have all been killed inside Manhattan. Even the ones that were down in the tunnels, I guess. They crawled down there and got them all. The poor canine units had to find them. And we're going to walk in and look at this post-war world and decide if this new statue, basically, from the people at Yonkers, staring out over the Hudson River, is art, or are we going to go to the gift shop and decide that it's product?
Gallery to the left, gift shop to the right. Have your tickets ready for the Dark Exhibition.
All right, so here we are inside the Dark Exhibition. This is the moment where we basically talk about this piece of media, and we define it's sort of like where it sits on the line between art and product. And this is important for me personally, because both of these things can be good. You can have products that are fantastic. You have products that are just kind of mediocre. You can have wonderful art that makes you feel something. You can have things that you know are aspiring to be art that leave you feeling cold. So where did this fall for you?
So it's interesting, and I feel like I've said this almost every single one of these things that we've covered, but I think to really accurately assess that, you have to remember when it was written.
Yep.
And again, 2006 is not 100 years ago. It's not that long ago. But to me, I'm going to put it under art, and there's a couple reasons for that. The first thing is, as much as we sit here in 2024, the zombie thing has been milked and milked and milked. Like, this really was kind of the apex of the return of the popularity of the zombie in pop culture.
Yeah, Dawn of the Dead's 2003. Zack Snyder really is the guy that kicks it off with 2003's Dawn of the Dead.
So 2003 is Dawn of the Dead. 2003 is also Max Brooks' first book, which is the Zombie Survival Guide, which is written in the style of the SAS Survival Guide or a lot of other survival guides that were out there, but for the zombie apocalypse.
Also, it exists in universe in World War Z, and it's called the Civilian Survival Guide.
Correct.
Yeah.
So the thing to me is, as much as right now we look at it and we think of, The Walking Dead and all this other stuff that exists, this to me at the time, it was, I don't even want to say it was riding the wave. It was creating the wave.
Mm-hmm. It was nostalgia. It was 20 years after Return of the Living Dead. And so you had a nostalgia wave now for zombies.
And the other thing for me is that Max Brooks made what I think is an unbelievably brave artistic choice, which is copying the format of The Good War and applying it to a fictional setting. Because if you were going to tell people a story in 2006, you probably weren't going to pick a somewhat forgotten piece of news media from 1984 about an event from 1944. Mm-hmm. So I think he did something that was narratively interesting. It was narratively fresh and new. And it delivered for me at the time, being a big zombie fan, it delivered something that I felt like I'd absorbed everything that was out there in that felt completely fresh and new. Mm-hmm. And I didn't expect something fresh and new. I was just hoping for something good. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's art.
I love when we disagree. I'm going to call this a product. And the reason I'm going to fall on this in the side of product is there's two. One, because it is so well written. He is a writer. He comes from a family of writers and comedy writers, where if you ever hear writers talk about writing, they call it a craft. Right. They don't necessarily call it art. And the reason why I think this is a product is there is no fat on this at all. It is like we said, oftentimes thinly veiled political commentary of the time, using zombies as a way to take that medicine, as a way to lighten that. It is the most Mel Brooks way of doing things, right? It's his family's tradition of making us think about uncomfortable things by putting it in the form of something else to confront us with those things. The Producers is that, right? Like he is following his dad's, he's following his dad's tradition of challenging people to be able to think about something by giving it separate context. So we're not we don't carry in our biases and our morals to that messaging and that questioning. And it's so well done. It's really, really well written. It's efficiently written. It has enough like you say, side quests in the writing, that the overall narrative isn't too, like, it doesn't make it too naked. It makes it palatable to have all that social messaging and that political messaging in it. And it's of its time, obviously, him wanting to make a political commentary on the climate he's living in and needing to find a way to do that. And so for me, it's so well crafted. There's no messiness to it. For me, there needs to be an element of risk taking and chance and messiness in art. And this is so finely polished and crafted that I see it as a product. I look at this as a beautiful watch. You know what I mean? A beautiful car, a beautiful, like, an elegantly written piece of music. There's not any real loose ends. It all like, there's so much circling back and there's so much plant payoff in it, where you can see that comedy writing, you know, like genealogy that he has in his family. This to me is a finely crafted piece of product, and I'm here for it. Like, I mean, you and I both consumed this over and over again because it was so well put together. And as a writer, as a person who writes and loves thinking about that stuff, I can't help but admire the quality of the writing. And to me, that craftsmanship and the way that it's like designed, and like you said, it does wear its homages on its sleeve. Like, it does obviously come from that tradition of, like, no, this is like my dad, I'm going to make a parody of something. And the parody I'm going to do is these dusty military books that I watch all my dad's friends and, you know, family read all through the 80s and 90s. I'm going to make one, but I'm going to make it my way about things that I like to tell this same sort of convenient messaging, like The Good War did. So that's where I land on this, because I can't separate the craftsmanship from the art and experience.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, it's funny because part of my filter, because again, I keep bringing up the fact that, you know, look at these things in the time they're in, is part of my filter with this is when I look at this and I think of it as product, because it's not that it's not at all product, I see that being this progression for the worse.
Yeah.
Because again, for me, I liked it, whether it's product or it's art. I thought it was great. It was a quality item. So even if it's product, it was a high quality product. And then we had to revisit the audiobook.
Yeah.
And we had to add in a bunch of stuff that is not of the quality of the original audiobook.
Sure.
And then we had to make a god awful movie of it, which interesting thing about the movie. So the movie is terrible. No one ever watch it. You're a bad person if you watch it.
You can hate watch stuff. I can hate watch things. It's okay to hate watch things.
Like,
I hate watched Rebel Moon. I probably will.
I just asked you if you needed a supervisor because you did.
I will hate watch the part 2 of that.
So here's the thing.
Gonna happen.
Here's the thing about World War Z as a movie that strikes me as where art declines all the way into product. So one, if you watched it and you read the book, you know that the two things have nothing in common other than the title. Like, that's it. That's it. The irony in that to me is that's not the first treatment of that book written as a screenplay. The first treatment of it written as a screenplay was written by J. Michael Straczynski, who very well known right now comic book writer, but he's the guy who wrote and produced and directed Babylon 5. Yep. He's a big fixture in sci-fi. He wrote what was apparently a very faithful adaptation of it that was very well respected, that the studio said, we're not going to sell enough tickets.
Right. Yeah.
Throw it in the trash, rewrite it, and you end up with Brad Pitt World War Z.
Yeah. I think, and I mean, it's funny because that really reinforces the commercialism message of the,
it's just where we fall on that timeline.
Yeah. I think if you were going to make this into a film media adaptation, you needed to just Band of Brothers it. You needed you did the exact same thing. You give it a limited series on HBO and you make that.
And that's it. Like, when you talk about being of the time, at the time, if you were going to produce this, it was going to be a movie. Yeah. Right. Now, no, this should be a prestige series on Netflix, on HBO, absolutely. On whatever.
I'm honestly shocked this hasn't been picked up. Yeah. As a prestige TV show somewhere. I think the zombie fatigue was real for the last 10 years. There was just too much zombie shit in the zeitgeist for a long time. And then Zack Snyder made Army of the Dead, and it was just like...
What I haven't read yet, and I feel bad, I forget the name of it, but he wrote a book in the same format about...
Sasquatch.
Yeah.
Yep.
And...
Yep. Sure is. Sure did.
Did you read it?
Sure did.
Is it good?
It's great.
Yeah. Okay. Because I actually have it on my...
It's great.
I have it on my wish list right now. I got to pick it up.
It's a more intimate version of this because it's one town story, right? And one town story. Yeah. It's great.
Yeah.
It's him basically, he repeats the formula. It's a lot more horror movie because it's like journaling as opposed to, like a straight up like interview process because it's found footage. It's found footage of the book, basically.
Yeah. I definitely want to get that though. Total aside.
I love that we ended up talking about Sasquatch.
Our asides have sides.
Yeah. So now it's time, I guess, to leave. We've been dragged away as the Z-Shock takes hold of us, and we're being sent to a special institution for people who have fought too long in the zombie war. I mean, you and I have fought long in the zombie war.
It's been a long time in the zombie war.
You and I have definitely done our hours in the zombie war.
I can't remember if I ever told you this or if I told somebody else this about how long I've been fighting the zombie war for.
No.
So when I was young, because I'm old, the first TV I ever got for myself was a black and white TV.
Sure.
I had a 13-inch black and white TV at Canadian
So
Tire.
you didn't know it was in black and white?
Yes. So when I watched Night of the Living Dead the first time, I didn't actually know it was a black and white movie. I thought I was just watching it on my black and white TV. That is how long I've been fighting the zombie war. That
makes me so happy. Oh man!
Decide which part of that story makes me the oldest.
I don't care. That's great. So anyway, we find ourselves dragged off to the Grim Asylum.
As night descends, we scratch our messages into the walls. Future warnings for inmates of the Grim Asylum.
All right, so the Grim Asylum is the segment in which we will now discuss the themes, what we thought were the powerful themes. We've identified tons of themes in Grimdark Media, and it's not to try and assign them all to any individual piece of media. It's what did we think was the most powerfully represented in this one. I'm going to let you go first in this one and pick out what you thought was the thing that kind of resonated with you that makes you think this is Grimdark.
So I only picked two. Which is going to foreshadow where I'm going to end up on my list.
Interesting.
So the first, it's the obvious one. It's just death.
Sure.
You have a book where, and it's funny. Yeah, it's a Max Brooks thing. I can say it's funny.
Sure. Yeah.
There are these snippets, these high focus points of death being important, but for the most part in this book, death is a statistic. It's in the background. It's about a character. It's looking through a character's eyes and everybody they know is dead. It's not about the death they encounter. So death is everywhere in this. But it's interesting because it's not important. Mm-hmm. Like it is the setting. Death is the setting. It's not the action. Mm-hmm. It's an adjective. It's not a verb.
Mm-hmm. I didn't have death on mine. It's just interesting because I do understand like grief and loss and death are definitely themes in it. But my strongest overriding one, I only had two on my list as well, is dystopia. Yeah. And it's actually the way that because it's such thinly veiled political commentary, it's trying to poke at all of the ways that our current society is dystopic and all the things we ignore about our society because it makes us more comfortable to live, and all of the evil things that we're all intelligent people for the most part, when confronted by facts, and that such a huge portion of us is willfully ignorant to those dystopic elements because it's uncomfortable and we'd rather live comfortable lives. So the themes of dystopia in this one are the things that I picked out as being grimdark because it's not just our society, it's globally. Like, I think that's what makes this effective is because he doesn't play favorites and he makes it a global disaster. It's about not saying anyone has the moral high ground. And he's very careful about that in the writing, that our whole planet, like our whole human system is dystopic right now.
He does a really good job, by the way. We didn't touch on this. I'm surprised neither of us picked this as one of our favorite things earlier on. But he does a really good job of eliminating the filter of good versus evil in a lot of cases.
He does, yeah.
And making it about actions and inactions.
And I think that's the value of the format here, is that when we have this sort of like global view and he doesn't pick and choose it to be an American story or it to be any one sort of like hemisphere's like take on the zombie apocalypse, we get I think not a more pure, but a more interesting way at picking at all the ways in which our society is out of balance and uneven, and that no one had the right answer, right? Like literally no one comes out of this clean, and nobody has
social commentary, not political commentary.
Yes.
And there's a difference.
And structural and infrastructure commentary, because that I think is, when you look at it from the bottom up as opposed to the top down, and it's not about power, because the zombies don't care about power and they are waging total war against you, and everyday people have to deal with the consequences of the way their society is structured. It becomes a more interesting, I think, way of asking that question. And it doesn't provide us one of the answers. It just shows us in this fictitious contest, like, what would the consequences of all of this stuff be? So that was it. That was Dystopia was my first pick.
So the funny thing is, and this has happened with us before, you picked Dystopia. I took a lot of those same underlying things, but I didn't pick Dystopia. I picked horror. Now, for me, the horror is kind of like what we talked about in Death. The zombies are this background thing. They're set dressing. The horror in the book, in the narrative, in characters' recollection and retelling of the events is not about the zombies. It's not about the zombies ripping people apart. It's about what people do and how they do it and why they do it. So, like Tishon's recollection of the compound being overrun and all of these poor, desperate, hungry people basically coming in and killing all these celebrities and rich douchebags so they can have their fortress house. When he's describing it, he describes it as being the first contact is they see hundreds of zombies running towards the compound. And then there's this pregnant pause and it's like, wait, zombies running? They're not zombies. Why are the zombies running with ladders? And it's that realization that these people they're going to do something horrible to save their own lives from these people who are clearly much worse than them.
Yeah, they're not in the moral high ground at all.
They're much worse than they are. When Todd Wainio is talking about the Battle of Yonkers, again, it's pretty transparent. He's not talking about the zombies killing all those soldiers. He's talking about military leadership and the bureaucrats killing all those soldiers. They had a bad plan. They made bad decisions. They did them for bad reasons. And that's why these things are happening. It's when you take that one step back from it, is the thing like the zombie apocalypse is the environmental issue that's caused all of these things to bubble up.
It's a disaster movie.
But it's not what's actually causing any of this tragedy and death.
The horror is coming from what we're willing to do when we're 3 meals out. You know what I mean? When we're 3 meals in our own skins away from
and it's funny because the parallel, like when I was actually making my notes, the parallel I was thinking about is my daughter was just recently rewatching Buffy and Angel. And there's a scene, and I don't remember what the lead up to it was because I wasn't really watching, where Angel makes basically a deal with the devil. That he's gonna save a bunch of people, but he's gonna be condemned to hell for doing it. And they're having this conversation in the elevator. And the elevator is this metaphor that the elevator is actually taking them down to hell. And he's like, so you understand, this is the deal you made. And when these doors open up, you're in hell. And he's like, yeah, no, that's the deal. No problem. And the doors open up and he's standing on the street in front of the building they were in before. And he's like, what do you mean? I thought the deal was that if I did this, I was going straight to hell. And he's like, oh, you're in hell. And this is what this book kind of captures the best of. It's like, no. All of the things that are wrong and that were wrong, they didn't really have anything to do with the zombies. The zombies were just what made you see it.
And so it's funny because my version of that was the only other theme that I really picked out of this as being powerful was entropy. Was that we, at the outbreak of the zombie war, are globally and culturally in decline. And so while we all sort of like as a human world had the power to stop this, all of the fractures in our sort of social structure and the way that we interact with each other and the way that we trade and the way that we do business and the way that we politically interact and socially interact allowed it to happen. And that it was completely preventable at millions of different points. But look at all of these flaws that we have as people that allowed this to then grow to the point where it's overwhelming us. And so that entropy, that sort of like social entropy, political entropy, economic entropy, all of that stuff is what leads to the net result of there being only 10 to 20% of the world's population left.
And I guess where I see horror, where you see dystopian entropy, is when I walk out of the studio today, we're living in the world that's 5 minutes before this book ends.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it's just come out of a pandemic.
Yeah.
This is a world about a pandemic, and how did it handle the pandemic, and how did it all go?
Did we learn anything, or
Did we
better?
learn anything? But imagine a pandemic now where every time the pandemic wins, it adds to itself. That's a point made over and over again in the book, is that every time you lose a soldier in this war, the opponent gains a soldier, and how horrifying that is, that it's an escalating problem. Yeah, that's it. Those were the themes for me. So I guess we wake up now, we stumble out and find that we're in Manitoba. We're in the national park.
Slowly working through the north.
Everyone's fled north because the problems are still in what they call the white zones, which is still where things freeze and thaw. Because for some reason, even though most human tissue is partly water and the cell structure explodes when it freezes, zombies don't have that problem because their blood turns to sludge. They they kind of hand wave that.
Max Brooks is a writer, he's not a scientist.
No, he just hand waves that, which I think is great. But he makes a point of hand waving it, where it's like, no, they can freeze and thaw even though humans can't because zombie. It's just clever. It's just like, no, because they're zombies. Why? I don't know, because they're zombies. But we find a huge pile of, unfortunately, it looks like fairly gnawed skulls. And we have to arrange this in our throne of Grimdark Media.
As the light fades and the end draws near, where does this sit upon the throne of skulls?
All right, so in Throne of Skulls, we all have piles of skulls. She has a pile of skulls, I have a pile of skulls. It includes all the things we've covered so far. We get 20 skulls to arrange in our pile of Grimdark Media as to where we are going to put this ranked up against other media in the genre. So where would you put, I guess we're starting at number 8 now?
Yeah.
We're number 8 in the pile. Oh my God, okay. So with number 8 in the pile, we have to decide where we are putting this media. So what was, I'm going to pull yours up. I'm going to do your number 8 first. Go for it.
Yeah. So even though I picked this and I mentioned I was foreshadowing it earlier, I'm actually putting World War Z at number 8. I think the style of the book and the fact that it is being written as a historical document after the fact when things are getting better, even though the events are horrible and the outcome is horrible, the sun has risen.
Interesting. Okay.
So I love it. It's great high quality stuff, but in terms of its grim darkiness, I put it at 8 of 8.
Okay. I did something similar where I actually am not putting this on my list.
Oh, look at you.
I'm gonna go so hard into the paint that I actually don't think this is Grimdark Media. Not to say that it doesn't have horror elements, which means I need to pull up my list from last time. I'm only going to have 7 items on my list. I'm not going to put this on because.
Well, you know what? If you want to keep the numbers even,
no,
you can put your other little thing from last week.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I can put Rob Moon on this. No, Rob Moon also doesn't qualify.
I want you to remember.
I'm never going to put Rob Moon on here.
I want you to remember what you did.
I'm going to completely plot twist and left turn and not put World War Z on Grimdark Media on my Throne of Skulls because of the hopefulness of the message. Because the overall message of this is that when it's 5 minutes to midnight, we get our shit together, come together as a planet, and as humanists basically prevail. And not only do we come out of this as a global community, we also restructure our society in such a way to solve most of our social issues and become an egalitarian sort of like society overall.
So I'm not going to disagree with what you're saying, but I just need to double check something. You know, in those Avengers movies, you know Thanos was the villain, right?
I'm just saying.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
Okay.
Apparently wiping out 80% of the world's population solves a lot of problems. I'm just saying. He went with half. I'm just saying he didn't go all the way. He could have gone to 80%. But yeah, for that reason, I don't have a number 8. I'm not going to put this on my list of Grimdark Media because I think it's way too hopeful. So back to you. What's your number 7?
We've lived bad lives.
No, I don't think so.
World War Z is far too hopeful.
It's too hopeful. It's just too hopeful for me. All right, what's your number 7?
So then I'm going to go back to the bottom of my old list. It's still The Last of Us Part 2.
I love that World War Z is below The Last of Us Part 2. It's no longer on the bottom. That's my favorite part about this whole episode.
It won't be the first one to drop off my list.
So my number 7 is Rangers of Shadowdeep.
For 6, I'm still at Astartes.
For 6, I'm at Event Horizon.
5 is Event Horizon for me.
All right, so for 5, it's Hard Boiled for me.
So for 4, I did Rangers of Shadowdeep.
Sweet. My number 4 is Astartes.
For 3, I did Hard Boiled.
My 3 is The Call of Cthulhu.
Number 2, I did The Thing.
I have The Last of Us Part 2.
And number 1, I'm sticking with The Call of Cthulhu.
And mine is John Carpenter's The Thing. So there we go. I wanted to left turn this one. I wanted to make a bold statement.
Are you just getting me back for the whole product and art at the same time?
No. This is my bold statement. I just think it was too hopeful. I think it was too... I don't think the grimness was here. I think the dark part was.
Yeah, fair.
But I don't think the grim part was. And I think that's okay. I think we can pick media and have that happen.
Totally. I think what's interesting is, again, maybe it's... I took the grim darkness to be the social commentary.
That's fair.
So
yeah. I think the futility has to be there for me.
Yeah.
I think if we'd come out of it having not learned any lessons in World War Z, that would have put it on the list for me. But at the end of it, that opening, that final line, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. That humanity can somehow bootstrap itself out. I don't think that's grim enough for me.
No, that's fair.
I think that keeps it off the list. There's no stinger. We don't listen to Mudvayne and have the guy get back on the boat with the evil gold. You know what I mean? Like, sorry, I had to slip in some Ghost Ship. We hadn't mentioned Ghost Ship this episode.
Yeah, I know. That's weird.
It's just super, super weird that we hadn't brought up Ghost Ship.
I'm trying to figure
There's
out.
also ghost ships in this book, and we didn't find a way to bring in ghost ships.
Yeah, that's true.
Like the ships.
That's true.
There's a whole ship scene. We didn't ghost ship it.
You know what? It's also not grimdark, but at some point we're doing this about Ghost Ship. We're
just do that.
doing
Jay watch Ghost Ship. All right. So we are back next week with another episode. I'm excited for this one because it's game time, and when it's game time, it's pain time.
That's what I heard.
I got to pick the game this time around. So we are going to be doing. I didn't actually look up the year that this was really published, but I should, because this was, again, foundational for me. I think I discovered this before I discovered H.P. Lovecraft.
This was actually,
this
was the last of the original series I picked up before I took a break.
Well, this is book 10.
Yeah.
It was originally published in 1984 in Warlock magazine, a short version of it.
Yeah, I think it was 120 entries.
120 instead of 400.
Version of this I don't currently have.
And then the original, this actual book is in 1984.
Hey, what's the book?
The book is, with a fantastic Ian Miller cover, House of Hell.
Or
House of Death for the country's
House of Hades. If you lived in the U.S. when it was originally
That's right, because they wouldn't say hell, because the Satanic Panic was happening, baby. So you were going to put hell on the cover of this one. But we live in Canada, and that meant Puffin put this on the cover.
That means we can have hell.
I bought this at a Scholastic book fair at my school.
So, that's one of the titles that Scholastic is re-released.
Oh, yeah. Hell yeah, they are, literally. So... if you want to play along, I'm actually going to do, I think, a patron play along of this. I'm going to do a live show where my patrons get to hang out and actually play.
Did you see my string of Facebook posts?
I did see a string of Facebook posts, yes. It was just very funny. We were playing the rest of Hell again. But I'm so excited to play through this again. So for those of you who don't know, this is a fighting fantasy novel written by
I think that was Steve Jackson, wasn't it?
No, it's not. It's a...
It should be on the front page, like the front page underneath the image of the...
I'm pulling it.
I could have sworn that was Steve Jackson.
It says Steve Jackson. Oh, no, it is Steve Jackson. I thought this one was a...
Well, you get a lot of the people.
No, I thought this one had it's interior illustrations by Tim Sell.
Because I think...
It is a Steve Jackson, yes.
Because I think after this is when they started... This was
doing
the end of the original Steve
Presents.
Jackson, Ian Livingstone run. And then after that, it was... guest authors.
It was guest authors. It was Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson present.
It was Tom Clancy's Net Force.
Well, they had to write them so fast because they were so popular. It was insane how popular these got. This is my play copy because my original OG copy is not in great condition. So this is my later printing because you can see it has the dragon on the cover for me to show off. But I'm going to play through this with the patrons, I think, which I'm very excited about. So this is a choose your own adventure fantasy book. It's basically, I don't know when the original Alone in the Dark PC game comes out, but it's very, very similar. Very similar.
It's
actually, I need to look that up now.
How you look at different stuff, right? Because for me, it's there was a whole series of Call of Cthulhu haunted house adventures, and it feels very much like one of those. It's not the
Alone in the Dark is one of the first like polygonal games too back then. The original Alone in the Dark is 92. So this is almost 10 years before Alone in the Dark. For MS-DOS. I love the platforms for this. MS-DOS, PC 9800, FM Towns, 3DO Interactive, classic Mac OS. It was on the Sega Saturn. But this is your car breaks down, you're an investigator, you got to go look in a house. It's been aped a million times from 1984. Yeah. I love this book. And one of like the most kind of like weirdly adult of the fighting fantasy titles from the 1980s.
It's funny because it alternates, like where it leans into some fairly high fantasy elements in a couple places in the book, and then it gets dark.
Yeah, you want to watch some of what Games Workshop was making back in 1984. This is it, baby. It's very exciting. I'm very excited for it. I mean, they were still selling Call of Cthulhu on the store shelves back then. Yeah. So this is right in line with that. You
couldn't just sell copies of Go.
Couldn't just sell. Yeah, that's right, Moncala. All right, so see you next week for another Grimdark Media. Thanks for watching. Bye, everybody.